So today I have animator Matthew Talbot-Kelly with me. Thanks a lot, Matthew, for doing this interview with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kenton.
So we are here to talk about your latest animated film, The Trembling Veil of Bones. And it's a joint venture, I guess a joint production by IFB, the Irish Film Board, and National Film Board, right?
Yeah, and my company, my film production company, Glimpse Digital, as well, is the third partner. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'll ask you about the experience of working with the two boards later. But now let me start by asking you, being born in Dublin, Ireland, and then growing up in Toronto, Canada, how did the different cultures actually affect your storytelling? Or did it?
Well, certainly the Irish experience, even to this day in 2010, is immersed in language. Like everyone, it's a bit of a cliche, but the Irish have the gift of the gab. You know, they have seemingly everyone is a storyteller there. Mm-hmm. Lovely turns of phrase, lovely respect for language, a lovely sense of mischief and humor about language. And definitely that is something that I missed growing up in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And each time I would go back to Ireland, still to this day, when I return to Ireland, I kind of just smile, you know. I just think, oh man, I'm home now, because really I do love that sense of language and storytelling.
Did your parents
having said that,
did your parents tell a lot of stories when you were young?
Not at all.
Not at all. Mm.
No, it wasn't that. I'd say growing up, I grew up in downtown Toronto, and my mum, we grew up, I'm one of 7 kids, and my mum, most of the time we were in Canada, was on her own. My dad was back in England. And so, it was a very Canadian upbringing, and quite a wonderful upbringing, in that we, myself and my 6 siblings and my mom became really good friends. We had to, because we were all living in very close quarters, and we all had to pull together to make things work and make ends meet, as they say. And so no, I had a fantastic upbringing. I love Toronto as a city, and Toronto is an amazingly multicultural place. As you know, I'm sure you've been to Toronto.
Yeah, I studied in Toronto. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a high school in Toronto where white people in certain classes were a minority. Mm-hmm. Right? It is quite.
You mind saying which one? Maybe the same one.
Jarvis Collegiate.
Jarvis. Okay, yeah, I've heard about Jarvis. I went to Forest Hill. But yeah, Jarvis is one of the big colleges here.
Yeah, and you know it's right downtown, and it's at the intersection of there's the it's the intersection of amazing juxtaposition, right? You're right around the corner from Yonge Street and the kind of main strip. You're around the corner from the Queen Street and the kind of artsy-fartsy kind of thing. You're around the corner from Cabbagetown, which was a gentrified, very cosmopolitan place. It was a big gay quarter. You had Regent Park, which is public housing. And was another kind of influence. You had Chinatown was not far away. You had Rosedale, which is the very wealthy neighborhood around the corner. I mean, amazing within such a small radius of a dense city, an amazing juxtaposition of cultures and income brackets and interests and lifestyles. Fabulous.
Did you travel a lot when you were young?
And I've never have had that upbringing in Ireland. Like that, Ireland didn't even have an immigration policy until 21st century. They never had immigration. They only had exigration.
Right.
You know?
People seem to just leave some. Yeah. So did you draw a lot when you were very into arts when you were in high school, or was it a later thing that happened to you in life?
Yeah, I've always drawn, and apparently my mom. One of the jokes was that one of the stories that my mom did tell me as I grew up was that when I was very small, and my mom was or my dad were putting me to sleep, I would tell them stories.
Oh,
So.
so you make up your own stories, or you
Made up my own stories,
Oh,
yeah. And interestingly enough, I had a really wonderful teacher when I was a young boy, when I was in grade 2 and grade 3, and I also had her in grade 6. Dorothy Elkington. She's still a good friend of mine, and an amazing teacher, trusting, daring teacher. And I spent, especially when in grade 2 and grade 3, I spent a lot of my time drawing and writing stories. And that was the pedagogical method that she used for us to learn language, punctuation, composition, organization, concentration, all these kind of basic things that can be that we might take for granted as being needed to be learned by young children. I learned through storytelling, and I still have friends who are in those classes with me that around today. Yeah.
So storytelling was in your gene. What is in your gene from being an Irishman, and also from schooling and from your teachers. Tell me, how did it how did you decide to go into architecture school briefly? I mean, and then after architecture school, I think you work a bit and then become an animator. Like, how do you go through that?
Yeah. A couple of reasons. One is my dad was trained as an architect, so when I was a teenager, when my dad was around in my late teens, we would have discussions about things and architecture and music and various things. So my dad was a very well educated man, and he was a big influence in that regard. So that was one thing. The other thing was that I went to university. So when I was 16, I actually went to an architecture school and spent a couple of days there and looked around and saw, just tried to get a sniff around, to see what it was.
See what it's like and what Dad did and what's it like in an architecture school. Yeah,
and I thought, no, I just kind of put it in the back of my mind. I didn't really think much more about it after that. And then I finished high school, then I worked and I traveled. I hitchhiked around Europe on my own for 4 or 5 months. And then I realized, especially in juxtaposed against European, the architecture and the painting and the sculpture and the languages and the streets and the cities and the villages and the beauty, of Europe. I came back and realized what an ignorant young man I was. And I started thinking about architecture again. And what appealed to me about architecture, and it was the reason I was never convinced I was going to be an architect. But what I was convinced about was the training of architecture, which I think is as close as you can get to a classical Renaissance liberal arts education,
Really?
where you're learning. Indeed, at the school I went to, Carleton University in Ottawa, it's a very progressive and experimental architecture school. We were encouraged to explore all sorts of different mediums. We weren't just working with paper and pencil. We were working in video. I did quite a lot of video and photography work when I was in architecture school. I did painting. We did kind of installation projects. And then you're also doing, you're studying.
Project?
Sorry,
art installation project, or
yeah,
you mean more art? Mm-hmm.
Art/architectural installation projects, and then you would go away in the summer and you'd work on doing different projects, and and so you get to experience that way. But also, you're learning philosophy and history, and you're learning engineering, right? You need to learn how to make things stand up. I mean, at least the principles of how to make things stand up. It's not we definitely have the luxury of having engineers around that to make sure that they don't fall down. It's not all on the onus of an architect, but that you need to understand the principles of engineering, and that's important. And then perhaps most importantly, you spend a lot of time working on a project for 2 or 3 months at a time, and then you have to present them into a panel of professors, right? You have to present your project in front of 5 people, and then often the whole school would be around as well. And so you're having to be able to think of an idea, think of a concept, work it through to a certain extent, and then present that idea to the world, and then defend that idea. You had to present it and defend it to people, and so it was a really fantastic training in all of those ways. That was my background. And then also when I was in my final year of architecture school, I actually for my final project I made a video. And it was very much about movement and a sense of time and decay and change that happens over a person's life. Mm-hmm. And it was that kind. When I finished school, that was my thoughts. Those are my finishing thoughts of architecture school training. So when I went out into the world and looked for work and started engaging in work, I began to realize I was more interested in the time and movement than I was with the static object of architecture. So that's how it kind of came about.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about the time and decay and whatnot, it's kind of actually a natural way to bridge to Bones, your latest shot, the Trembling Veil of Bones. Like, can you talk about how your architecture training and what you just talked about influence this film?
Oh, well, that's a big one. This is a story that I have been playing with in my mind for many years. I used to tell it to my kids when they were very young to put them to sleep, and so I had gone through many different variations. So, no exaggeration, I started working on this story probably 10 years ago, I'd say. Wow. Mm-hmm. So there are many factors that come into play in the thinking of the story. One of the things is I don't really call myself an animator. I call myself a filmmaker, and I'm kind of shy about saying I'm an animator because I'm not really an animator. I kind of move objects around space and make stuff move around, but I'm not trained as an animator. I'm trained as an architect, and I think about things. I think about architecture, and I think about film, and I think about animation in terms of space and layering and time and movement. Those are my kind of preoccupations. So the original idea for Bones was I wanted to animate a person. And the reason I wanted to animate a person is I don't have the patience to learn how to animate a puppet or animate a computer-generated puppet or a marionette puppet. And I thought it would be really quite interesting to have a human character made up like a puppet. Mm-hmm. I then can animate, like I can be like the puppeteer of this.
The one that's holding the strings and whatnot.
Holding the strings, exactly. Mm-hmm. So that was a big influence on the idea of it. And then by having the main character as camera recorded, made up in prosthetic makeup, then I spent a lot of my time working out the architecture, working out the surroundings, mm-hmm. and designing the secondary characters. The secondary characters in the story are computer-generated characters, so I would design those by drawing and then modeling and then